Women leading the way.
Hey everyone, welcome to Women Leading the Way by counsels, a podcast about women shaping the future of finance, fintech, blockchain, and technology. Here we don't talk about titles or success stories, we talk about real moments that shape a career and how leadership changes when women are in the room. I'm Maria, and in each episode we explore one big idea through a personal journey. Today we are talking about regulations in crypto and Web3. Our guest is Ania, Chief Legal Officer of Nexus Mutual, the leading on-chain insurance alternative. Ania leads legal strategy across investments, compliance, data privacy, and the complex legal questions that come with building in Web3. Together, we'll talk about what it means to work in an industry where the rules are still being written and uncertainty is a part of the job. We'll also take a look on what it means to move through this environment as a woman, how to build confidence, speak up before you feel 100% ready, and whether clear regulation can help create a more inclusive and trusted space. So, Ania, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Maria, and thank you for this very kind intro. It's great to be joining you here today.
I'm really excited to have you here because we actually met in Cannes during Ethereum Global Week, which is quite a specific environment, I would say. And I remember you spoke about your work and your legal side of the industry, which is super inspiring, especially how you highlighted that Web3 is not just about technology or products, but also about trust and regulations. So it feels like you're already deeply immersed with the industry. And I also know that you didn't originally come from the crypto native background. And maybe we can start from there. How did your transition into crypto happen? And what does your role actually look like in practice?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I actually started in insurance. So part of what I do today actually is related to where I started, but it was more around litigation. It wasn't around 2019 when I moved to technology, and I transitioned into becoming a tech lawyer. So around contracts, but everything technology related. And then around 4 or 5 years ago, I was approached by my first crypto-related role at Fireblocks. And what I loved about that, it was actually a female general counsel who approached me for the role, indeed, Irena. And I remember our first conversation, and I was very transparent with her. I was like, listen, I have some basics around crypto, but there is still a lot of learning for me. And I think she understood that actually there are very few, and there still are very few crypto lawyers around. So I think from that perspective, it was more assessing if you're someone who is a quick learner, someone who actually enjoys the nuanced aspect of blockchain, the nascent aspect of it, how quickly it progresses, how quickly it develops, that there are not always obvious answers to the questions that you might face. So that was my beginning. And then 3 years ago, I moved to Nexus Mutual, where I was able to combine both the insurance background and the blockchain and technology background. And this is a very specific role because Nexus Mutual is blockchain native company. So as a lawyer, I feel like this is probably the most challenging role one can have because very little of what I do day to day, and I'm sure we'll speak about that later, but very little of what I do has been done before, and that is super exciting. But at the same time, it takes someone who is a little bit pragmatic. So that's how I got into the space in the first place.
Great. And now that you're in this space, which is super cool, I'd love to make this a little bit more practical, I'd say. We've already touched on the fact that legal work in crypto and Web3 is still quite misunderstood sometimes. So why do you think that is? What are the biggest misconceptions that the industry and founders still have about legal in crypto? And what makes this area so specific?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest misconception is that DeFi, decentralization equals lack of regulation. that you can just build something and there are no repercussions. And I think what the founders in this space need to understand that although you start from a small company, you don't know where you're going to be in 5-10 years time. And if you don't look at it from a legal perspective early on, there will be a lot of fixing later down the road. And I think that's probably the biggest misconception, that everyone concentrates and focus on technology, and they think, okay, you know what, legal can happen at a later stage. But it's very difficult to unpick some of the, structures, some of the processes that are in place or things that are not in place. And especially if you're already like 2-3 years down the line, maybe you went through an ICO, the initial coin offering. Maybe you are a DAO, like Nexus Mutual originated, and it's still partially structured as DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization. There is a lot of actually traditional legal aspects, even in those areas that you need to consider. And, it's much easier to do it early on rather than when you're already a full-blown project and maybe you start to think about working with financial institutions or more traditional institutions, because that is what we see a lot in this space, that the traditional is now entering and bridging with crypto, and the traditional world will expect you to have all those processes in place. So I would say not everyone is keen on lawyers, but I think there are really good, very good pragmatic lawyers in this space that can help you enormously with building the project.
Yeah, absolutely. You just mentioned that the industry is changing very fast and it's very complex space. So how do legal teams adapt to all these changes? How do they keep up with constantly changing regulations, like across different jurisdictions? And maybe how they build processes that allow them to stay on top of everything?
That's a very good question. And I think a lot of companies are actually struggling with that. Because things are progressing so dynamically. And it always makes me laugh how different my life is now compared to when I was, for instance, in private practice. If you had a legal question, you would go into a legal book or some legal website that would be able to give you at least some starting point. Where I get most of my information, it's Twitter. That's how I find out most of the time or X, as it's now formerly Twitter, obviously. But a lot of legal developments are first published on X. And it's incredible because if you follow the right people, you are really quickly able to see the changes as they're happening. You don't have to wait for something to be published as a law or proposal. That someone is speaking about regulation because there is a lawyer in crypto that had this conversation with a regulator and they're happy to share that. So from that perspective, a lot of your knowledge comes from sources that you wouldn't ever consider before. But also from people around you. And I can't underestimate and underemphasize how important it is to have and be surrounded by people in the industry and keep those connections. Speak to other lawyers, speak to other in-house counsels. Like I make it my aim to meet as many in-house counsels as possible. Whenever I go to conferences, I'm always on the lookout for people because we are the foundation layer. I feel that everyone who is in crypto right now is like the foundation block, and everything that will be built in the future will be built on our experience, and we will be part of that. We will be helping with the regulations and legislations. So yes, I would say definitely build your network, because that is how you will be able to build your in-house specialism.
Women leading the way.
Maybe you can touch a little bit upon what are you doing with Nexus Mutual. So it's very interesting to understand what are you building, guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you've already mentioned, Nexus Mutual is an alternative to traditional insurance. It was founded 7 years ago by Hugh, who is an actuary by profession, and he felt very passionate about building a structure where people would be supporting people, basically. In essence, what Nexus Mutual is and how it has been built, it's like the very old school idea of insurance, 100 or 200 years ago, when people would meet in pubs and they would put money into, let's call it a bucket, and if there was a misfortune to your neighbor or to a ship or whatever it was, people were supporting people and they were paying the money out of that bucket. And this is exactly what Nexus Mutual is. We're not a regulated or licensed insurance. We are what's known in England as mutual. And again, this is not a loophole. This is actually an established legal concept. You have the likes of Medical Defence Union or, for instance, Medical and Dental Defence Union of Scotland, which are mutuals that protect doctors. So this is not something new that we invented. Is a traditional concept that we just already Hugh was able to translate into a blockchain concept. And luckily, we have been quite successful over the past years, and we were able to grow not just as a team, but just more generally as a DAO or as a mutual. I think there is under 10,000 members now in the mutual.
Wow.
And all those people basically came together and they buy the products that we offer and in essence support each other. So yeah, that's Nexus Mutual.
That's super interesting, especially the point that you translated something from traditional market into the crypto space. And I guess maybe somehow this idea also can help a wider audience to understand that crypto is not something strange and dangerous, because it's still, we can say, doesn't look 100% safe for wider audiences. And how do you think, what needs to be changed, or can the regulation help to build this wider adoption of crypto?
Absolutely. I think it's very important to understand that it's not just crypto that is misunderstood, right? That is still perceived as a bit of Wild West. Neither you or I were around when banks first started, right? When insurance first started, when a first car was invented. There are always problems, there are always bad players. There will always be issues with anything that's new, and especially new technology, because it is quite easy to abuse something that is, and as you said, misunderstood or not understood more to the point. So I think regulation, super important, not overly regulating. And I don't think that we're going that way, although there is still a lot of work to do. I know there are a lot of groups, a lot of roundtables around MiCA. How is that affecting, crypto businesses? There is a lot happening in US right now. And I think the regulation is really crucial. And I think this will definitely make the space safer, the better it gets. But my personal belief is that education and risk assessment is probably the most important aspect. Because if you do not understand what crypto, what blockchain is, then you don't know how to protect yourself, right? And what we're seeing around and what we're hearing constantly is exploits, hacks. And yes, of course, you cannot protect yourself from everything that is out there. If you understand how you can put simple measures in place, like if you're a crypto holder, whether it's a hot or cold wallet, do you have antivirus on your computer? Do you have a cover? I don't mean covered by Nexus Mutual, but anything that protects you, like any sort of insurance, any sort of, tools that would help you navigate this space. So I think regulation, super important. Education is the way forward, because if we educate people, then they will understand the risks way better and they will be able to assess their position way better.
Women Leading the Way podcast.
Absolutely. I really like the point about education, because really, I think it's one of the key tools for wider adoption in any industry. And as you said, when a new technology first appears, people are often skeptical or unsure about it. but over time they become more familiar with it. And maybe we'll see the same thing happening with digital assets and crypto. And you also touch on the fact that this is a very fast moving environment and the industry develops quickly. And sometimes there are moments when you don't have clear answers from a legal perspective because the technology can move faster than the frameworks around it. So, have you ever been in a situation where there was no clear legal answer? And how did you approach it?
Oh, I think this is probably my favorite question. This just about describes my life.
And every day.
Oh, absolutely. So I've already mentioned I've been with Nexus Mutual for 3 years. And I can say very honestly that pretty much every week brings a challenge or a question that I haven't dealt with before. And most of the lawyers that I know have not dealt with before. There are sometimes questions that I'm being faced with that have not got any legal precedent. So I think, first of all, if you consider coming into this space, you have to be very pragmatic as a lawyer. You have to understand that you will not always have a ready legal solution, that there is no legal precedent. And that takes a special type of person that is prepared to go and look into traditional structures and see, okay, how much I can translate into blockchain, how much I can't. What is my gut feeling? Because I think, especially when you're a lawyer, if you have certain level of experience, if you have been in not just this industry, but just a legal industry for several years, you develop a gut feeling for what might get you or what might get a company into trouble and what should be okay. There are certain questions that I will sit there and I'll think, would someone go to prison because of this? Or is it that we do not have answer to this and we're doing the best that we can to come up with a solution that is safe for our users? Because that is the most important question. Like I have to ask myself every single day, is the solution that we come up with, if there is no clear legal answer, is this safe to our members? Is this safe to the environment? And sometimes that is all that you have to rely on. If you're very lucky, you will have lawyers around you. I am the only counsel at Nexus Mutual, which makes it a little bit more challenging because I don't have the opportunity to bounce the ideas off other people. But I'm very lucky that I have friends who are also lawyers in this industry. So if I'm struggling with something, I can always pick up the phone and ask them if they faced that sort of question. But a lot of my role, there are obviously things like, I don't know, we dealt with bankruptcy estate, like around FTX, for instance. Or I deal with employment issues, with incorporating entities. So there is a lot of stuff that is already established, but there is a lot of stuff that is not. And especially around DAO, which I already mentioned, this is such a nuanced aspect, not just in crypto, because no one really knows exactly how to structure it. So it is a pure DAO, right? There is a lot of papers around it, but I think maybe 2 or 3 DAOs that actually have managed to achieve that. But there are a lot of questions around that. So as a lawyer, the best you can do is be pragmatic and be safe.
Wonderful. And I guess you have to be very curious in this kind of work because it's such a complicated space, but also a very interesting one. In many ways, you are doing things for the first time.
Oh, absolutely. And, just to add to that, I personally decided a year and a half ago to go back to university and do a master's in legal technology, which is blockchain and AI related. And that was my way of how can I put as much effort into what I do and into this space, and how I can improve my knowledge. Other people and that also what gives you the ability to meet other people, not in necessarily who are already working for a blockchain. There's a lot of academic people, but it is one of the ways that you can progress and educate yourself, I suppose.
Women leading the way.
Let's move to a different side of the conversation. So far, we've been talking about the crypto environment and regulation, but I'd love to shift to leadership, especially from a women's perspective, since this is Women Leading the Way podcast. So I'd love to hear how you see the space from a women's leadership perspective. As I mentioned, we first met at an Ethereum conference, which was obviously quite a technical event. And I was there with my colleague representing our Women Leading the Way project. And we noticed that there were not many women in the room. And I think that's actually how our conversation with you started. And I remember you said something that I find really important, that ideally we would reach a point where we no longer need to specifically highlight women in Web3 or women in crypto because the space itself become truly inclusive. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to emphasize, I think that the goal is not to stop celebrating women. I think that we should absolutely be doing that, especially women in this space, because it is very male oriented. And I think every year you go to those conferences, and I am happy to say and happy to see that there are more and more women on the floor present. But I remember I had a conversation with someone a few months ago, and she said to me, I remember when I entered this room in 2019, and I was the only woman out of 40 men in the room. And it was so intimidating. But I just decided to go in and just make the best out of this situation. And I think this is precisely what we need to continue to do. Strive for the world where women, it's no longer a need to emphasize that half of the board or half of the C-suite is women. That is just natural, that we make sure that women feel confident in that make sure that women do not feel like they are the outsiders. Because right now, and I see that personally as well, very often when I do panels, for instance, and that happened a couple of months ago, I was the only woman on the panel with 5 other men.
Wonderful.
Yes, and it is wonderful. Someone said to me, like, go you, this is incredible. Like the second you get on the stage, everyone will already be supporting you because you are the only woman. But in my head, like I would love there just to be a room full of people with passion for Web3, for blockchain, for DeFi, for TradFi. I don't know how long it will take. What I do know is that I am seeing more and more women. I'm seeing more and more confidence. I am one of those people that I will spread the love around, and I will encourage any women to get into this space if they want to. Obviously, not everyone wants to be in a blockchain. It's everyone's personal choice. But we need to have those conversations, and we just need to make sure that other women see that there are already women in the space. And you know what? I think all of us sometimes sit there and think, okay, I mean, do I know it all? No, I don't. Do I have an imposter syndrome? 100%. I don't think that you can ever completely get rid of it. And I think if you did, that means that maybe you're overconfident. But all that you can do is basically do your best and encourage other people, because the more people you encourage, the more variety we get in the space. And, and I mean a variety, not just from female, male perspective, but from the point of view, from the ideas perspective. So hopefully one of those days we will be just a Web3 space.
Lovely. Let's see what the future brings. And what helped you personally to build this confidence in your expertise, and especially when you started the crypto space?
You know what? I think it's just it somehow just happened. I know what I did towards it. Like going and doing the masters was one of the points. But I think working very closely with my team, working very closely with the founder, working with engineering team, understanding the environment, understanding the ecosystem, not just from a legal perspective, but actually from the technical perspective. Because a lot of what we do as lawyer, we basically protect companies, individuals, projects against risks. And how can you understand a risk? Well, you have to educate yourself. And I remember very vividly that to begin with, I questioned every single decision that I made. Every single time I was drafting something, I questioned, is this correct? Like, am I making mistake? It's not perfect and it should be perfect. And it actually took understanding that things will not always be perfect, that I will not always know the answer, but also relying on my team. Like very often I will draft a document and I will send this to people in my team, whether it is BD, whether it's engineering, my founder, and I'll just ask, can you have a look? Does this make sense? Because I think that the technical aspect makes sense, but I might have missed something because I'm not an engineer, right? I have not been educated specifically in technology. And the more I am doing that and the more feedback I get, the more confident I feel. But also the more I do things like speaking to you, podcasts, panels, because I think this is a conversation that I have very often with Hugh, the founder of Nexus Mutual. We do not appreciate as humans, especially in this space, just how much knowledge we have. It's not until you speak to someone who maybe understands crypto on the surface level that actually you're already a specialist. I've been in this space for almost 5 years, and that is a century, like in crypto terms. That's a really long time. I lived through a lot of ups and downs and the volatility, the FTXs and the biggest blowups and the biggest hacks, like a lot of that. And I think understanding and appreciating this also helped me massively. I don't think that there is one rule for everyone, like, if you do this, it will just happen. I think you just have to go out there and be ready to fail occasionally. Be ready and be prepared to be told that maybe you're not 100% right, but this is the only way to learn and this is the only way to improve. So I would say this is probably how I gained my confidence, just basically relying on the help of other people around me, telling me if I'm right or wrong, and just doing as much of reading, Twitter, educating as I possibly can. And also it makes it easy if you are doing something from early days of that thing. Like we lived through a lot of things that happened in blockchain, various upgrades, various layers. So you understand that already way better. So I would say that's also my advantage. Not everyone will have this advantage, but there is plenty of education online that you can find these days, that will be able to help with that.
Women Leading the Way podcast.
And let's perhaps touch a little bit on the psychological side of things. There is still a perception that women are more emotional, and perhaps this can sometimes hold them back in their careers, especially in such high-speed space like crypto, where a lot of changes happen every day and you often have to make important decisions under pressure. So do you think this is actually the case? Can handling emotions be more complicated for women in this kind of environment? And what type of personality do you think is needed to build a strong career in this space?
So I think that being a woman in this space is actually beneficial.
Wow.
Because women are inherently more risk averse, which means that the decisions that you make will be safer. You are the sounding board. You are the person in the room that will just say, hold on a second, let's stop. Have we considered X, Y, and Z? And I think this is super beneficial, especially in crypto, because there is a lot of projects that have been built maybe just on pure hope that things will work out. And I don't think that being emotional, I think that both men and women are emotional. It's just we are being perceived differently than men. I think, when you look around, there are very few, oh, actually, hold on a second. not a single war that has been started by a woman in the past, let's say decade, in the past few years. So I don't think that the emotional aspect of a gender difference is an issue. I think women bring a lot to the table. I think women have, and again, I'm not saying that women do not have emotional intelligence. Of course they do. But I think if you have this balance, especially, on C-suite boards, if you have men and women, they all and each bring something very valuable to the table. And women are very emotionally intelligent. I think they are very good leaders, especially from, maybe because of the emotional aspect of things. And again, I'm not saying that men are none of those things, but if we are already putting some of, specific features on females, then I think actually we should be utilizing them to the benefit because they are beneficial. I don't believe that someone being emotionally intelligent or someone being emotional is a disadvantage. I think this can only help the boards. This can help the C-suite in actually having a different perspective and understanding risks differently. So I would say definitely it's not something that if you're a female listening to this and you're wondering, should I or should I not? You absolutely should, because you are equally as qualified as men. And I think we had this conversation as well during EveCC. But we as women feel that we need to have 100% of the skill required before we apply for a job or before we do something, before we submit a project. It all has to be perfect. And I think this is very different from male approach. I think men are more prone to, I will figure it out. And there is no right or wrong approach here. But I do believe that women should cut themselves a little bit slack and just go for the jobs and do the projects. Because if you feel you're passionate about something, and I'm saying now more generally rather than like in legal aspect, I'll come back to legal aspect in a second. But if you feel that you have the passion, that you have the willingness to learn, then you stand exactly the same chance at getting a job as a man would.
Women
and then from a legal
leading the way.
perspective,
Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Just be prepared that you will need to be a little bit more pragmatic. As we already mentioned in one of the previous questions, there are a lot of problems and there are a lot of issues, obstacles that you will face that have not got legal precedent. So you have to be a little bit more pragmatic and you have to be a little bit more willing to take on risks for as long as they're relatively safe risks. But I think, yes, women should definitely enter the space and not wait for something to happen for, a different time or less risky time, because I don't think that there will be any better time. The sooner you enter, the better chance you have at progressing with the space and just becoming a specialist.
Absolutely. And do you think regulations can help build a more inclusive space, or what kind of initiatives or, I don't know, maybe communities or something can bring more inclusive space in crypto, fintech, finance?
I wouldn't go to regulation as first part of call. I would say more education and support. And I think going back to, I hope one day there is no just women in Web3, that there is just people in Web3. What's super helpful right now is the fact that we do have those groups like Women in Blockchain, Women in Web3, having podcasts like that, actually encouraging other women, because it wouldn't be done by anyone else but women, right? So I would say from my perspective, if I have someone in my ecosystem who considers moving to technology, moving to crypto, I always encourage that. And I always offer support, mentoring. I do mentor someone within Nexus Mutual as well, because I just believe it's so important to be giving this confidence to women. But I would say education and just women to women support is probably number one thing that will help us. If you are in a position where you're looking to hire people, encourage your friends to apply. The process will still be fair and right if you have both men and female applying, but at least you will have some females applying, and they will get to experience the interviewing process. They will get to experience the questions. And I think that just boils down to the more of something you do, the better you get at it. And like, you might not get the first job, you might not understand initially, what blockchain is, but the more you listen, the more you educate yourself, the more you try, the better you will become at that. And there's a lot of fantastic groups on LinkedIn. There are a lot of senior people on LinkedIn, and I know a lot of them would not respond to a cold email, so to speak. But it's worth trying, especially if you're a junior person. And I do hope that a lot of junior people will listen to this. Just reach out, because it doesn't cost you anything. And yes, it might be difficult if someone doesn't respond, but sooner or later someone will respond, and you might be able to get this experience, or at least some guidance, some mentoring, some tips on how to maneuver in this space.
Absolutely. I remember myself when I started just going to those crypto events, it was very hard for me to start talking to people, especially men. And more you talk to other people, you understand how they entered the space, more confidence you gain. And I think, just mentoring and support from each other is very important.
Women leading the way.
Perfect. I think we touched many of things I wanted to cover. And before we wrap up, let's do just a quick fun segment called Traffic Light. We try to do with each guest in our podcast.
Okay.
It's not about crypto or legal things, just a general little life check-in. Let's associate our life with the road. And we have a traffic light, and green light means start something new. Yellow light means keep going. And red means do less, or maybe pause doing something. I'll ask you just 3 quick questions and you answer them without overthinking. Let's do it. So, green light. What's one thing you want to start doing this year?
Learn Spanish.
Wonderful. Podemos hablar español también.
Yo hablo un pequeño.
Right. Wonderful. Absolutely. Learning languages is great. It really helps to keep your brain active.
Yeah.
Great. Let's move to the yellow light. What's one thing you want to keep doing this year?
Exercising.
Great.
I exercise a lot. I love going to the gym, and it is probably the best thing for my mental well-being. I find that whatever problem I have, especially at work, actually, funny enough, if I go and I lift some weights, I find solutions to most of the legal issues that I deal with. So if I'm having one of those mornings that I have a really difficult question to answer or document to draft, I will take time out, go to the gym, lift some heavy weights, sometimes go to sauna and do like a cold plunge. And I will most certainly know the answer at the end of that session, or I will have a fairly good idea where to start. So I would also encourage other people to do it. It's like incredible for your mental well-being.
Yeah, 100%. Sport really helps in this kind of environment. I also try to do yoga every morning. It helps me stay calm and grounded. And then you can go into all your calls, all your Zoom meetings, and just nail everything. So moving to the red light, what's one thing you want to do less of this year, or maybe even leave behind?
Phone. Social media. I find recently I have been finding it that social media, whether it's Instagrams, Facebooks, make me feel maybe not anxious, but overwhelmed. Overwhelmed is the right question. And I was very lucky to have gone away for 3 weeks earlier this year and basically just roamed around jungles of Costa Rica with no or hardly any internet. And I have to admit, It was the best 3 weeks of my recent existence. My sleep improved. My clarity of mind improved. So I am actively trying to reduce the amount of time that I spend on my phone. And that is definitely my biggest green light for this year.
Great. I love how it turns something you want to leave behind into your biggest green light for the year. Okay, and to wrap this up, what advice would you give to women who want to enter Web3, but perhaps feel they are not ready yet enough? We already touched on it, but just to summarize.
I would say you will never be ready. Just do it. Just old good slogan, just do it, because it's like with a lot of things in life, starting a new business, adopting a dog, having a baby, doing something, like quitting your job. There is never a good time, but now is better time than next year, because the sooner you are in the space, the more knowledge you gain. And I say that with all honesty. If there is anyone out there that would like to have a conversation, I'm more than happy to have a conversation. I'm more than happy to, do the encouragement session or, like Q&A session with an individual, because I think it's super important. So please do feel free to reach out on LinkedIn to me, but there is never a good time. So just genuinely just do it, because I'm pretty certain you're already good enough and you'll learn everything else on the job.
I love it. Thank you so much. And we definitely will put all your links in the show notes below so people can contact you if they feel like it resonates to them. Thank you so much. I think today's conversation really showed that regulation and compliance in crypto and Web3 are not just about following the rules, but also about building trust in the industry, which is still taking its shape. And perhaps the most importantly, I would like to wrap this up with the idea that women in these complex environments, in these high-speed environments, are often exactly the leaders the industry really needs. So once they stop doubting themselves and start trusting their own perspective, the success is guaranteed.
Oh, I agree 100%. Like, I could not have said that better myself. So yes, a lot of encouragement.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Maria. Really appreciate that. And it was actually great chatting to you. Really loved this.
If this episode resonates with you, share it with the person who needs to hear it. For more stories and updates, visit womenlead.co.uk and follow us on our LinkedIn page. This was Women Leading the Way by Drofa Combs. Thanks for being with us and see you in the next episode. And don't forget, women don't just follow the way, they lead it.
Women Leading the Way. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.